but ultimately it's meaning that we want. And the more meaning that we can actually find and activate in our lives, the more energy that we have. So meaning can lead us to our purpose, but it is ultimately our source of vitality.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network, teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, home, and the world at large. You just heard from Alise Cortez. Alise is an organizational logotherapist who helps companies activate their meaning and purpose. She also happens to be a radio show host, an inspirational speaker, and an author of several amazing books. And the thread that is woven through all of those things is her passion for helping others find their passion. The world is finally reaching a tipping point, and it's no longer enough to just find a job that pays the bills. People want to work to be aligned with their values. In our conversation, Alise encourages us to look to the different sources of meaning in our lives to help us discover purpose. She also gives tips for how organizations can help their members feel connected to mission and to one another. But first, let's start where we always should, with consciousness. Conscious Habit listeners, it's always so interesting where we find our guests. Sometimes it's from listening to other podcasts. Sometimes it's from introductions from other people who have been on the show or our great relationships. This time it's from LinkedIn. And I love that because LinkedIn is such an incredible community. And I think oftentimes it feels like it's this space where we're always being sold to, but don't sell yourself short. It's also a space to connect with like-minded people. And that's how I met our guest today. We've got Dr. Alise Cortez with us, who also has her own radio show, y'all. And so we're going to plug all of that stuff at the end. But Alise and I can geek out on some things that we definitely have in common. Consciousness, first of all, passion and meaning. I cannot wait to jump into all of this stuff with you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be on.
Great to have you, and great for our listeners to get to learn from you. And every time I do a podcast, I just love that I get to put my learner's hat on and sit back and be curious along with the listeners. So every single show, I start off with a question to our guest, and every time it's unique. And the question is, what does consciousness mean to you?
For me, consciousness really speaks to, if you look at the word itself, with knowing, right, of sorts. So to me, that really speaks to being fully turned on to every bit of input that you can get. All of your senses are heightened and turned on, and that you're reaching to understand and connect with the world through all of your senses, through every capacity that you have. So it's like being on high alert and being able, if you can, in the moment, to be able to take in what you're getting and try to suspend the judgment that might come with it. And especially we as humans are equipped with so much bias to somehow try to suspend that at the same time. So to me, that's what consciousness is.
Oh, I love that. I get such a sense of aliveness from that definition too, because the present moment unfolds in the midst of our senses, right? What we're seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, experiencing, and it can be really so rich, but we're often so distracted from that. And again, to geek out on consciousness, we'll talk about your newest book, The Great Revitalization. So much good insight and wisdom in the book. What has turned you on to this idea of consciousness matters? What's been your path that's led you to the work that you're doing in the world?
Such a delicious question, first thing in the morning for me. There really is a specific answer to that. It started in my mid-20s. I'm originally from a small town in northeastern Oregon, population 4,800 when I was in high school, couldn't get out of there fast enough. Made my way to the big exotic city of Portland, Oregon. In my mid-20s, began dating someone who was 10 years older than me, as most of my boyfriends were at those years. And about a month into our relationship, he said, "Hey, my company is going to transfer me to Madrid, Spain." I said, "That is so great. You're going to love it. Congratulations. Good luck." He said, No. I think you should come with me." So I agreed. So here I am. I'm 26 years old, and I make my way to Madrid, Spain. And we were there for 6 months. I'd learned French in college, so I had the basis there. I could speak some Spanish, which I got better. I was still working on my bachelor's degree at the time from distance. An amazing life. And then after that, he said, "Hey, they want to move us to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So we go there, and now we're there for 2 years. So now I get Portuguese, go all over South America. Literally, I'm 26 years old, Amy, and I have a live-in maid, a chauffeur, a gardener. I'm not working because I don't have a visa, so I'm just studying and I'm just enjoying life, air quotes. There was just one problem. I was miserable in many ways. And the maid, Dalva, she would find me in the house crying. I know she thought to herself, what is wrong with this crazy white woman? She's got everything. Why is she crying? And what I discovered then is that we humans, it's a terrible situation to just consume life. What we need to be vital, healthy, and strong is to give and be in service to it. So what I was missing was that meaning. I was missing that place to feel like I mattered, that I was doing something in the world that was helping and I was being of service. So that's where it really kicked off. What we say in logotherapy is that's what's known as the existential vacuum. Others might recognize it as the midlife crisis, except for me, I was 26.
For many people who are listening, how many of you have had the dream that I'm just going to give it all up? I'm going to sell everything. I'm going to move to the beach. I'm going to sell suntan lotion and coconut drinks, and my life is going to be amazing. How incredible that you got that lesson early, that you were like, hey, I've got this life so many people only dream of throwing it all away for, and starting over and having all of this freedom. And I'll use the air quotes along with you. And yet you've still found yourself in misery. And what a beautiful quote of consuming life instead of being in service of it. How long did it take you in the midst of having it all and yet feeling like you're missing something for you to realize, oh, it's meaning that I'm missing here? And then what happened?
Well, I didn't know at the time, Amy, that it was meaning that I was missing. I didn't understand that then. I was only with the gift of hindsight that I could really put it together. What I did know, though, unequivocally, was that I was miserable. I was really unhappy. And to the point where part of the wake-up call for me was I had a girlfriend come down and visit me. She's someone that I knew since 8th grade. And she saw my interaction with my then boyfriend at the time, which was really awful. And I was an awful human being to him. And it was really an expression of my own misery. And she said, I don't know who you are. This is not the person I've known since 8th grade. And that was probably the beginning of the major wake-up call that things were not right in paradise. But beyond that, actually, I remember distinctly, we used to do a lot of entertaining. He had a very big job with an oil company. And so we would have these big parties at our house. And I remember once, probably toward the end, and a woman came up to me and she said in Portuguese, she said, Alise, você está com a estrela baixada, which means, Alise, you are with a lowered star. And that means she saw my depression. So when people started to give it to me in stereo, I was like, okay, this is really unavoidable. This is not just me. And it wasn't the relationship so much. It was that I felt so constrained by my circumstances and I wanted to matter. So it really took other people showing me the mirror, if you will, before I could really start to make a change. And then I actually left the relationship. And I moved back to Portland, Oregon on my own and kind of started over afresh. And I actually was doing my master's degree at that time, halfway through it. And so I literally left that life, Amy, of having a maid, a chauffeur, and a gardener to being a maid. I came back and I bought a little cleaning business and I cleaned homes for $25 an hour in 1993. And I could do it half time and still make my living, et cetera, while I finished my master's. And it was really the best soul cleaning that I needed as well.
What a turn of events. And in those moments of now you're back pursuing your master's, you've got your own work that you're doing. Did you find yourself in a happier, more content place there, having less, but feeling more purpose driven than you did in the quote unquote having it all?
No doubt. And in fact, I can look back at that time, Amy. I was as dynamic and fit and frankly as sexy as I've ever been in my whole entire life. And I was in my own skin. I loved who I was. I was 28 years old, the whole experience of reorienting myself back into life in the United States. And it was a great time for me. Beautiful.
So I'm guessing from there on out, it's been a fairy tale, right, Alise? Like you've just lived in purpose and meaning and everything's just fallen into place ever since those days. Or were you like many of us that the lesson came back to you several times along your path, which continued your own inspiration to teach it to others?
I just listened to a podcast the other day, which I could really resonate with. Dr. Ben Hardy was talking about distinguishing successful people from others. And I'm not talking about success here, but I really resonated with his notion that we must navigate the valleys in order to be able to rise to the peaks. It's in the valleys that we are preparing ourselves for the peaks. And I really believe that's absolutely right. What I see consistently, this is a pattern for me, is I'm a person who needs to cogitate. I need to study. I need to learn. I need to lean in and crunch and chew on ideas. After that period, I finished my master's and I moved away from the cleaning business. I started selling various services, health club services and telecom, et cetera. And then found my way into selling, believe it or not, I used to sell flour by the truckload, the train load from Seattle, Washington, mostly into bakeries into Los Angeles. What really happened there again is then my existential vacuum was awakened again. It really caused me again to go back to get more education. That's when I started my PhD. It was, again, that call to try to fill that vacuum, trying to find that meaning again. I was comfortable. I had a couple of homes, a nice car, it was vacations. I was in a relationship with what would become my husband, but it wasn't enough. And what I keep hearing from people, Amy, is that what they know is, I think there's something more. I hear that over and over again. And what they're almost always speaking about is meaning. Once I got into my PhD program, which is in human development, there it was. I could feel it. I was feeling my soul. I felt full, fulfilled, and I knew I was growing. And that was really the beginning of really what set me on the path of becoming a human capital consultant and what I've been doing ever since in an increasing, unfolding way.
The basis of the book is meaning and purpose. And I want to dive into one chapter in particular, dubbed the therapy chapter. And so on your quest of finding meaning for yourself and then working with companies and individuals for them to dig in on their meaning, I feel like that word, people often have sort of misnomers about what it is. What does meaning mean?
Meaning and purpose are two words that get conflated. They are not the same at all. So from the logotherapy vantage point, when we look at meaning, meaning is really, it's that which that registers as significant to us. And it's always going to register along whatever we value. So what you find meaningful, Amy, will be different from what I find meaningful because our values are different. For example, this is a meaningful exchange or experience for me to be with you because I value education, learning, sharing, educating others, right? So this is a meaningful experience for me. Somebody else might go, oh, I had to be on this podcast today. Nope, not me. So meaning is the source of vitality. And that's why the book is called The Great Revitalization, because we can actually vitalize ourselves through the activation of meaning. What we know from logotherapy is that meaning is our chief concern as humans. This is what we actually care the most about. It's actually not money and prestige. They might be because if they're meaningful to someone because they didn't have their security or its status or whatever, but ultimately it's meaning that we want. And the more meaning that we can actually find and activate in our lives, the more energy that we have. So meaning can lead us to our purpose, but it is ultimately our source of vitality.
The source of vitality, does that become then your intrinsic motivator that you attach to extrinsic goals?
It's definitely an intrinsic motivator. So what logotherapy is really about is the more that we can activate and get present to, back to your consciousness, get conscious and present to that which is meaningful to us and source it and bring it forth in our lives, the more energy that we have. Therefore, we put that energy into our relationships, our work. It goes with us everywhere. And it's that we just have more oomph, if you will. That's why the first part of the book is anchored in the GUSTO acronym. It's that thing that the more that we can get present to it, that we have that vitality. And what's amazing, Amy, when I'm out speaking to audiences, what I find is when people are listening, Amy, they're listening with everything they've got. They're hanging on every word because it's something that they just don't get in their everyday lives, but they recognize immediately its power, its source, its import, and they lean in from their toes. It's just the most amazing thing. And it just shows me how hungry people are for meaning.
I'm going to put my listener hat on here. I'm listening to Alise and I'm hanging on to the words that she's saying. And I'm saying, okay, I want that too. How do I find it? How do I get it? Is there a formula? Is there an exercise? What do you encourage people to lean into?
Great question. So one of my most favorite talks to give, it's called Grab Your Gusto, Live with Passion, Work on Purpose. And so what I do in that talk is first I share that meaning is the most important, our principal source of motivation and energy, et cetera. And to logotherapy, we have three sources of meaning available to us at any one time. The first source is our creative contributions, what we give of ourselves to the world, what we express of ourselves to the world. I call that passion. The second source is our experiences and encounters that we have that are, again, meaningful to us, register along our values. I call that inspiration. The third source is the attitudinal stance that we take whenever life throws at us, whatever it does. We have a choice in how we can respond, and I call that mindset. So what I do when I'm working with people is I help them get present to those three sources, and I get them to start to share and connect with what are you passionate about? What are you doing in the world that is a unique expression of you? What breaks my heart every time, Amy, is when I look at the sea of people that I'm talking to and I ask the question, what are you passionate about? And the whole crowd sits and they take on that question and they consider it and they mull on it and they realize they don't have an answer. They do not know what they're passionate about. No wonder people are living lives of quiet desperation. People are overusing opiates. People are committing suicide. No wonder you don't know what you're passionate about in this one precious life. So if we can, one, get people present to what are you passionate about and be in that. Don't give yourself over to that. It's the giving yourself over to that that energizes you. That's the vitality that you're missing. What do you mean you haven't gone surfing in 16 years and it's one of the most favorite things that you do in your life? Go do that. Right. So then the second thing, the inspiration piece, what is it that really fills you with vitality and connection, those experiences, those encounters? For me, it's absolutely hosting that radio show every week. I love that I get to connect with people all over the world. So then the attitudinal stance is when you recognize that you really do have more power, responsibility in your life, that is actually incredibly empowering. It gives you a sense of vitality and stability, a sense of agency about your own life. And that's incredibly fueling for people. So when I help people get present to these things, what we're really doing, and this is all logotherapy, Amy, is we're just activating the spiritual resources that are already inside every single one of us, regardless of your faith, your culture, or you don't have any faith for that matter.
You're right. There's a lot of people who don't know. And I've heard other speakers talk about this where they've asked people and there's a lot of like a blank stare. Maybe it's because we give it the wrong definition of passion. People often think it's like this singular thing, the reason I'm alive, the one piece that's burning within me. And that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself to be like, I just have this one reason. I like your definition mixed with creativity. What are the things that you can kind of bring yourself to? Maybe you enjoy cooking and preparing a meal. You can be more mindful within yourself. You can be more in the moment. Time tends to flow away, so you move more in flow. That could be something that you have passion for, but it doesn't mean it's like the reason I'm alive is to cook. It just happens to be this is a part of what I do that brings this aliveness to me. So I like the idea of take the pressure off of yourself. This does not have to be like, I have a reason for being alive and it's this one thing. Maybe it's multiple things. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. This is where this gets really yummy for me is you were talking before about passion and giving over of ourselves through our creative contributions and that we're still in the meaning realm. So meaning, that's the energizing piece. So what we find meaningful can lead us to our purpose and be indicative of our purpose, but meaning is not the same thing as purpose. So if we love to cook and we love to cook for other people, if we actually roll that up to a bigger realm, remember, purpose is always about serving other people. It's being in service to something else, to someone else. And the backdrop of that, we will often find fulfillment, but it's about first serving others. So maybe if somebody loves to cook, maybe there's something in their purpose that speaks to they're out to really help others connect, to bring people together in a meaningful way. Maybe that's more of what this is indicating or starting to shine a light on. But meaning and purpose get conflated. They're not the same.
I think it is good to help people make the distinction for their own internal definitions of where they put the emphasis or where they put the pressure or the stress, because this is actually meant to be uplifting, not something that creates internal turmoil. I like the approach that you take with people and just that curiosity of what's working and where are you now and where are you already spending these times? What are your experiences in staying on this meaning piece? So most of our audience are business, either owners or leaders or folks who have a growth mindset in the business world. We're thinking about ourselves when it comes to meaning, but if we're looking at meaning across the board of our culture, what are some of the positive effects that we're likely to see in that ripple effect?
When I go into organizations, I can tell almost immediately where we are in the meaning scale just based on the energy in the organization. Well, sometimes I can walk in and I can actually feel the toxicity. There's already an unhealthy atmosphere in there. So therefore, they're already holding themselves back. When I go into organizations where you can start to feel this sort of a buzz, now we know people are turned on. There's a limbic resonance, if you will, among the people that are in the crowd. That is palpable. And that gets transferred into creativity, to perseverance, to productivity. It's all energy. So what's interesting for me is that when people hear me talk or they know me at all, the one word that frequently comes up for them that they put on me to describe me is energy. So I do traffic in energy. So I'm uniquely qualified and able to measure and sense energy. And I find myself working in the energy field. Basically, that's the meaning camp. No, it's not fuels and fossil. It's a different kind of fuel, but it really shows up in the fortitude of an individual being in their own lives and across the work they're doing inside organizations.
I think it's helpful to reflect everybody that's on here. I mean, we come up with our purpose statement for the company and we've got our why, mission statement, and all of these things. We don't always necessarily attach that to each individual and then bring that back to the collective. And you're right, the companies who do it well, you know it the minute you walk in, you can feel it in energy. Our passion, I think, can be seen, heard, and felt. Meaning and knowing that people are living it can be seen, heard, and felt. Let's shift gears to chapter 5 and talk about ownership and purpose, both on an individual basis and within an organizational culture.
Well, let me tell you what purpose is not. Let's start there. The example I give in the book is I was on a fellow stage speaking at a conference, and one of the other speakers got up and she belted to the audience, "My purpose is to double my income." And I just wanted to throw up. I wanted to go and take the mic from her and just get her off the stage. I'm like, how many people have you just misled? That is not purpose. It is a goal. It's a nice, ambitious goal. But purpose is always, first and foremost, about serving others. It's about being of service to the world. Secondarily, you will probably gain fulfillment out of that. So if we look at purpose as starting from the organizational vantage point, why is this organization in existence? And importantly, why should anyone care? If we say that the organization is in existence just to make piles of money, we're not in the purpose camp. We're back in the gold train kind of thing. People are not going to want to give their lives over to an organization that says, hey, we exist because we want to make boatloads of money for investors or for ourselves. What we need instead is to be able to raise our gaze higher and to recognize, well, let's say we're a financial services company. It's still about money. I know of one here in town. They specifically exist to serve families with mentally disabled children in them. That is a very specific reason to exist. And they do that because they care about lifting those communities that are otherwise underserved. Now we have something to really stand for here. And this is where the opportunity is to communicate that so that it lives in the hearts, minds, and souls of the people that are working with them in their whole stakeholder community, not just their employees, but their suppliers and the people that they actually serve. When they all understand that, are connected through that thread, the ownership piece of that is so strong, so palpable, so united, difficult, if not near impossible to break. Now we have something to work with here. But it takes back to you being conscious to that, being present to that, being fully turned on to that purpose. And so that it lives in the very fabric of the organization's heartbeat, the way that they treat people, the way they talk, the way they make decisions. That's the power of purpose.
I think the purpose piece of it that I really like, that I think is often missed, is the why should people care? And the idea that it's always in service of something beyond you, I think are really helpful reflections. And then, Alise, I would love to just hear more about how it trickles back down to the individual. But you mentioned that stakeholder, that's when everybody's involved in that, you can see it, you can hear it. I would imagine it becomes the foundation or the baseline of what you're willing to tolerate within your business. Because if we know that this one thing is the reason we exist, and here's why our company is in business and why we've hired you here, then when people are acting out of alignment with that, it becomes an instant non-negotiable. We know what to hold them accountable to. We know when we need to part ways with people. We can love them, but it doesn't mean they're a good fit. So I imagine it makes making business decisions a little more clear-cut.
Very much so. It's a clear delineator for decision-making, Amy. You're spot on right. So I'll go back and say two things to that. So one, when I'm working with organizations, I help them to articulate first their purpose, which is why do I exist and why should anybody care? That's one thing. But then we also want to articulate, and this is separate, mission is actually the expression of what you do, usually your products and services, in service of your purpose. And then your vision is important because that's a statement of what does the world look like when you've achieved your purpose. So that's the forward-reaching idealistic state of affairs that you're all gunning for through your purpose. So those are very distinctive statements that I help companies to articulate. And there's power in that because there's clarity in that. One of the things that I have really loved getting my way to, and it's been an unfoldment process, is, and part of this is being a conscious capitalist. I serve on the board of Conscious Capitalism here in Dallas. Both of my business books are heavily influenced by conscious capitalism, practices and ideals. But one of the tenets of conscious capitalism is the stakeholder orientation. And that really speaks to, we're not just here to serve the investors. We're not just here to serve the employees. We're here to serve all stakeholders, everybody that's involved in the business. And when we do that, it requires more of us. And so one of the really fun things I got to do in the book is I was looking at how do I work with organizations to help them, first map out their stakeholders, but then engage them in this meaningful conversation about, here's our purpose. I want to make sure that you're connected to it, you're enrolled in it, you're part of it, you're rowing your boat the same oars, the same way we are in service of that purpose. When we all do that, now we're cooking with gas. When we do that, I'm saying that you're assembling your parliament of purpose. And I think there's real power in that. And the reason I chose the term parliament of purpose is I have this fixation with owls. I love owls. I think they're just so cool. I think they're interesting to look at. They're wise. They're different. They're unique. They're just a little off kilter. My friend Diane and I were talking about this, and she's like, what's a group of owls called? It's called a parliament of owls. So that's why I configured this phrase around, let's go ahead, ladies and gentlemen, in an organization, and configure your parliament of purpose. Bring all these stakeholders together, unite them around why you're in business. When we do that, Amy, oh my gosh, we have organizations that are doing this. Talk about the vibration. Oh my gosh, individuals within that exude this energy and this connectivity. It's so irresistible and it's so strong. So that's the power of really bringing and uniting around an organizational purpose. It's incredible. And it takes work and it takes ongoing consciousness too.
I was going to say that's the piece, because I think there's many people, and at least maybe you've seen companies who have done this. They've gone through the exercise. They've made the declarations. They've all agreed on what each one of these things is going to look like, the vision, the mission, the purpose. Maybe even they have some banners printed and it goes up on a wall somewhere. And then that is the last they have the conversation. And when somebody asks them the question, they're kind of quickly fumbling of like, where is that thing that we have up on the wall? And they're trying to quote it from there, but it's not lived. And so what would be your recommendation of how they begin to bring those stakeholders together, that parliament together?
The first thing is you've got to incorporate this into your operational design, right? So your purpose ought to be baked in to what you do. And I've done this with several organizations, and it's different for every organization because their values are different and so is their purpose. But one thing that's really important, and I got this from Dr. Ranjay Gulati, who was on my show, and I read his book. He's got a book out called Deep Purpose. And it's this notion of really fully baking in purpose into every decision, everything that you do. So one thing an organization can do right out of the gate is to recognize people in their organization that are exemplifying, that are living the organizational purpose and their values. Call them out as, Amy, you just rocked it today. Here's what you did in service of our purpose today. And you show that to people as an example, and you celebrate that, and you recognize and reward them for that behavior because they are literally living your values and your purpose. So when you do that on a regular basis, people can actually say what the purpose of an organization is without looking at the banner on the wall. They just know it because they live it. Now you've got something here because then it becomes sustainable. And what we want is we want every single person in the organization to be able to, on their own, make decisions that are empowered through the organizational purpose. And now you have what Zach Mercurio says, the invisible leader. And that invisible leader is purpose. So now you have something here that is so sustainable without somebody having to look over somebody's shoulder and remind them, oh, no, you're not doing what our purpose is. No, they are. They did it without you even knowing, behind your back even. And that's when it starts to work. So when you can start to inculcate and start to recognize, well, what does purpose look like? So as an example, I have a sustainability consultancy client here in Dallas that I work with. And last year we were going through their annual planning process, and they exist as a pioneer in the sustainability space for commercial real estate. So as we were going through the process and they were saying, well, what should we pursue this next year? I'm like, the question always has to come through. What's your purpose? If your purpose is to pioneer the industry, then it isn't actually to go down this other realm of something that's already been done. Your work in the world is to pioneer and steward the industry forward. So through that lens, we make our decisions, we make our choices, and we celebrate people that are doing that. So those are some of the ways that we can start to thread it through in our culture, our operations, our decisions, and our recognition processes to be able to fortify the purpose and make it live strong inside an organization.
Great insight. So now, if I'm working in an organization and the organization has its purpose and I kind of know my role within that purpose, are there some recommendations you have for the individual on how to take this in on the individual level to ensure that they're living that out in their unique individualistic way?
And that's the subject of chapter 8, which is called Wake the Soul. And it's really the notion of relying on spiritual intelligence. So let me just quickly situate this so people know where I'm coming from on this. So the last 3 chapters of the book are really about how to actualize this notion of activating meaning and purpose. So it's really chapters on the best practices that I've discovered and I'm putting forth for organizations. And the first chapter in that is really based on IQ kind of principles, rationally looking at mindfully your processes around human capital and how you're hiring people and developing them, et cetera. And then the second chapter is around emotional intelligence. So how are you caring for people? How are you making sure that they know they matter? How are you making sure that it's evident to them that the work that they're doing is meaningful to them? And then that last chapter is the spiritual intelligence, which is increasingly something that more of the forward-reaching organizations are starting to actually measure spiritual intelligence in their organization. And that really speaks to things like care, compassion, awe, love, joy. Maslow's would call those higher value kind of things. So in that chapter, what I'm really talking about is one, critical that the organization detects and articulates its purpose so everyone understands it. Then the next best thing is most organizations don't do this. This is definitely on the cutting edge, is then you give each of your individual employees the opportunity to look and start looking for and discovering their own individual purpose. Maybe someone's is, my purpose is that I create and see things in the world that no one else can see in this particular realm. Maybe they're part of the architecture team or whatever it is. Then the opportunity is, once they discover their own individual purpose, to then see and step back and look for how can they thread it through the overall organizational purpose. And therefore, what that does is it expands their person immediately. It enlarges them. One of the most powerful things that makes work meaningful for people, it's not the only one, is to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves that's important to them. So now if we actually help our individual employees to discover their own individual purpose, because we've invested in that development in them and working to detect it for themselves and then see how they thread it through the organizational purpose, that is so sticky. It's very hard to want to separate yourself from that if you can do that. And that's where the retention comes in. That's where the perseverance comes in. And that's, again, that vibration, that limbic resonance we were talking about before that becomes so strong, so palpable. And that's an opportunity that many organizations have. And I don't even know what number we would call out there, Amy, but it's got to be pretty low in terms of the population of how many organizations are actually giving people the opportunity to do this. I know that Ernst & Young, I think, did this for their people. It's a pretty small number, and therefore there's a big opportunity to really start to actualize this.
You're right, in many organizations. And we hear it from people. At least I know that you hear it from people. We might hear it at cocktail parties or somebody in our family, or if we're out networking, where there are people with this heart of, they're very altruistic. They want to help, they want to give, and they almost feel like, well, I can't do the work I'm doing and live in an alignment with my purpose, because they're thinking, I've got to quit and work for a nonprofit. They really feel like they've got to do something radically different. And what's likely happening is they're not in an organization that's helping them connect their personal purpose with the company's purpose. And so they feel out of alignment with their value system. They feel out of alignment with meaning, which is separate, but yet really importantly connected in that. So people are leaving. I think we see this a lot in millennial and even Gen Z, where purpose and meaning are very high on the list of why they choose the companies that they choose, why they stay with the companies that they stay with. And so, as you talked about in the book, like, this isn't some futuristic idea or thinking, like, it's here. I come work for you because you pay me well and you have good benefits. Those days are gone. Those people don't hang around for long because there's always somebody else with better pay and better benefits.
Amen, Amy. Yes, that is totally the subject of chapter 2, urgency. Look up, wake up, folks. This is the world we now live in. Everybody wants meaning and purpose. And if they don't, they will vote with their feet, and your customers will vote with their pocketbooks. I think that the figure is something like by 2030, the majority of the workforce will be comprised of Gen Y, the millennials, and Gen Z. And they are the ones, as you were saying, they won't do something that they don't find meaningful. When you can help people get present to their individual purpose aligns and threads to the organizational purpose, which takes work. What we're doing, this is your beautiful work, is we're employing a consciousness. We're turning ourselves on to a way to be able to understand how we're connected to the greater world around us through the organization that we're part of. And that takes an awakening. It takes looking, it takes reaching, striving for, and there's beauty in that, and there's energy in that. But it does take, one, an organization that has the presence of culture to be able to invite that. And it takes the competency of the leaders to be able to speak it and help people understand how what they're doing matters and serves the organization while acknowledging the beauty of their own individuality and their own talents. What we're not doing here on today's show, ladies and gentlemen, is we're not telling people to go quit their corporate jobs, to go live in a nonprofit or whatever, that likely they can find and express their purpose right where they are.
There's someone listening right now that needed to hear that. I say this on all of the podcasts when we get going with the guests, and I'm like, this could be a 2-hour episode, to be honest with you. But there's so much goodness, so much richness here in the content that you have, and so much goodness in the book. So shout out to the book, The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. Alise, will you tell the listeners where can they find your book? And you're going on a book tour as well. So where can they find you?
Thanks for that. So first place to find me is alisecortez.com. And you can find all the work that I'm doing there in the various books. You can see them and decide which ones you want. If you go to Amazon and just type in Alise Cortez, you will see all of my books there. There's 4 of them, plus a couple chapter books. Now for the tour, what we're doing is we're doing 33 cities from March to October. And they're all listed on gusto-now.com. So if you go to that particular site and then there's a Purpose and Joy tour, you can see the whole list of the cities.
Fantastic. We'll have a link to all of those in the show notes. Alise, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your passion. Grateful.
Likewise, Amy. Thank you so much for the great work that you do and for having me on.
Before we wrap up this episode, here are my 3 takeaways from Alise and how we can incorporate them into our lives. Number 1, meaning is what we value, and purpose is how we serve others. I love that distinction. I'm giving myself this homework, and I'm going to encourage you to do the same. What do you value? How do you derive meaning out of your work? And secondly, how do you serve others? That allows us to find our purpose at work and in life. Number 2, an organization's purpose should serve as the blueprint for all of its decisions. So leaders, how often before you're making a decision, either collectively or you're going to bring maybe an idea to the table, do you consider the organizational purpose first as the blueprint to guide all of your decision making? Number 3, individuals who discover their purpose within the company take full ownership of their role and responsibilities. And I cannot think of a company I've ever worked with where one of their goals didn't happen to be, we would like people to take more onus. We would like people to take more initiative. We would like people to lean in a little bit more. So on an individual level, if we are feeling disconnected from our work, I would encourage you to consider, how do you plug your purpose into your role? Are you able to do that? From an organizational level, I would encourage you to consider, how are we helping our people dive in and better understand their individual purpose and how it contributes to the whole so that we can all thrive together. Thanks for listening to Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. If you have questions for me or our guest, or you're looking for more ways to just live or lead more consciously, head over to Facebook. We have a Conscious Habit community there. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.